Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take your source materials, dig in, and pull out those key insights, maybe some surprising facts you might have missed. Think of it as your shortcut to getting up to speed.
And today we're diving into a really fascinating discussion. It features a leading Egyptologist, and we're using your sources to explore the Egyptian pyramids and the Sphinx. Our mission really is to unpack how they were built, their significance, clear up some common misconceptions, and definitely highlight some recent discoveries that are pretty remarkable.
Exactly. And the main source we have is this really engaging conversation with the expert. Okay, so let's get into it. First up, something that might challenge what you think you know about who actually built these things. You often hear it was workers who only worked during the Nile floods, right?
Yeah, that's a very common picture, isn't it? Like farmers drafted when the fields were flooded. But the archaeology tells a very different story.
Okay, so what's the archaeology showing us then?
Well, the crucial evidence, it comes from the tombs of the pyramid builders themselves. They found them just south of the pyramids. And finding these burial sites, it strongly suggests there was a permanent community there, dedicated to the building project.
Tombs, plural. So, like, different types. What did they find?
Yes, exactly. Two distinct cemeteries. There's a lower one, simpler burials, mud brick tombs. Seems like the general workforce. And interestingly, they found things like beer jars with the male remains and perfume vessels with female remains, maybe like their supplies for the afterlife.
Oh, okay.
And then above that, there's an upper cemetery, more elaborate, seems to be for the technicians, the overseers. Inside those, they found 21 different hieroglyphic titles. Things like overseer of the site of the pyramid, draftsman, clearly links them to the job.
So, a permanent workforce, different roles,
Yeah.
even hints about their afterlife beliefs. Fascinating.
Yeah.
What else did they find out about how these people actually lived day to day?
Well, the area around the tombs gave us even more clues. They found dedicated areas for processing fish, salting it, and a huge bakery complex.
So, a bakery?
Yeah, for bread production on a large scale. Plus, workmen's barracks, like permanent housing. It suggests almost a purpose-built city for these workers and technicians. And maybe the most surprising thing, thousands and thousands of animal bones, mostly cow and goat.
Hold on, cows and goats. The picture I always had was, laborers barely getting by on basic rations.
Precisely. But the sheer amount of these bones, it suggests a much better diet than we usually imagine. We're talking maybe 11 cows and 33 goats slaughtered daily. That's enough to feed a pretty substantial workforce.
Yeah.
The estimate is around 10,000 people.
Wow. 10,000 people well-fed, working year-round. That really changes the perspective.
It really does. And it underlines that building the pyramids wasn't just some side project. It was a massive national effort. Contributions of labor, resources coming from households all over Egypt, all focused on this one goal, ensuring the king's divine status after death.
Okay, so a permanent, organized, well-fed workforce. Got it. Now, what about the stones themselves? Millions of them. Where did they actually get them from? That's always a huge question.
It is, and the popular idea, like you hear all the time, is that most of the stone for the Great Pyramid came from quarries far away, like Torah, maybe 25 miles east. But recent findings, they point to a source much, much closer.
Really? What have they discovered?
It turns out the vast majority of the stone was quarried right there on the Giza Plateau itself. The plateau is part of what's called the Bukatam Formation. It has 3 layers. And that top layer, level 3, that's the high-quality stone they used for most of the pyramid.
So they didn't have to haul everything from miles away.
Not the bulk of it, no. Only the fine white limestone for the outer casing that came from Torah, and the granite for the king's chamber. That was brought all the way from Aswan, way down south.
Okay, so most of it was local. That must have made things, easier logistically.
Definitely. And what's really clever is how they started. They created a perfectly level base by cutting directly into the bedrock of the plateau, cut down about 28 feet into solid rock.
And that bedrock base, it wasn't initially counted as part of the block count, was it?
Exactly. Discovering that huge chunk of solid rock at the base back in 2010, that led to a big recalculation of how many individual blocks were actually in the pyramid.
Right, because suddenly you don't need blocks for those bottom 28 feet.
Correct. It significantly lowered the estimate. Now it's thought to be no more than about 1 million blocks, not the old 2.3 million figure.
1 million. Still huge, but more manageable maybe.
Well, especially when you consider the main quarries were only about 1,000 feet away from the pyramid site. Moving the main material wasn't quite the epic journey we'd sometimes imagine.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
So how did they get these stones up? The ramp question, what's the thinking there?
A ramp system seems Logical, right? And the current evidence points towards a theory of a permanent ramp, located at the southwest corner of the main pyramid. Excavations right there have actually found remains of this ramp structure still in place, in situ.
So maybe not a giant spiral ramp wrapping all the way around, but something more specific and permanent.
That seems to be the most likely scenario based on what's been found, yeah.
And the tools they used. I always picture really basic stuff. Copper chisels, maybe?
Well, they didn't have iron in the Old Kingdom, that's true. But they used very effective tools made from flint and, crucially, diorite. Diorite is an incredibly hard stone, actually sharper than iron.
Sharper than iron, wow.
Yeah, and we have examples of these tools. They've been found in the tombs. You can see them in the Cairo Museum. It's worth noting, sometimes you see pictures online of smaller, finer tools. Those are probably used for detailed artwork, statues, that kind of thing, not for quarrying the massive blocks.
Okay, so sophisticated stone tools for the heavy lifting. Now let's shift gears. You mentioned a discovery that sounds absolutely revolutionary, these Wadi el-Jarf papyri.
Oh, they really are groundbreaking, found just a few years back. It was at an ancient Red Sea port, a place called Wadi el-Jarf that belonged to Khufu. They were found in caves, along with pieces of boots, actually. And these papyri, they are the first actual written evidence we have about the building of Khufu's Great Pyramid.
Written evidence. From the time? What sort of information is in them?
It's basically the diary or logbook of an overseer, a guy named Merer. It dates back about 4,600 years. And Merer, he carefully recorded his work. In hieroglyphs, he calls himself an inspector. He led a team of 40 workmen, says they were hired directly by Khufu for the pyramid project.
40 workmen.
Yeah.
Hired by the pharaoh himself.
Yeah, and he even mentions his boss, his immediate supervisor, a man named Didi. And guess what? Didi's tomb has also been found west of the Great Pyramid.
No way.
Yeah.
A first-hand account from someone on the project. What does Merer actually say about the building process?
His diary goes into detail about transporting that fine white limestone from the Torah quarries, the stuff used for the outer casing. He talks about organizing his crews. He had one group cutting the stones, another smoothing them to the exact specifications for the casing, and a third group moving them.
How did they move them?
On woody sledges down to cargo boats.
Cargo boats. But Giza isn't right on the main Nile, is it? How did the boats get close?
This is where it gets really clever. Archaeological work, including some of my own digs, shows the ancient Egyptians actually dug a canal. They diverted water west from the main Nile branch to bring the waterway much closer to the pyramid sites.
They dug a canal just for the pyramids.
Seems like it. And from this main artificial canal, they then cut smaller channels leading right up to harbors, basically in front of each pyramid. I actually found Khufu's harbor near his pyramid during excavations in a nearby village. This whole network let them ship everything in, not just the Torah limestone, but also the granite from Aswan, alabaster, diorite from Nubia, basalt from Fayum, all by boat.
That's an incredible logistical system, using a man-made waterway. So Merer's diary talks about using these boats.
Yes, exactly. He describes transporting the casing stones from Torah to Giza via these cargo boats. He even mentions spending the night at Giza with his workmen before heading back to Torah for another load.
Amazing detail.
And here's something really significant. Merer records doing this work in the 27th year of Khufu's reign. That detail, combined with other evidence, like from a second boat pit being restored near the pyramid, it confirms Khufu reigned for 28 years.
Ah, so it settles that debate about his reign length. What else did Merer reveal? Anything about, like, where Khufu lived?
Yes, and this is huge. Merer's writings strongly support the idea that Memphis wasn't actually the main capital when Khufu was ruling. Merer clearly states Khufu lived in a palace at Giza, in an area called Ankh-Khufu.
Ankh-Khufu, meaning?
Khufu lives. It strongly suggests Giza itself was the effective capital during his reign. The palace, the government, the administration, all right there next to the pyramid project.
So the pyramid project basically shifted the whole center of power to Giza.
It certainly looks that way. And Merer adds another interesting detail. He talks about how long it took to get to the pyramid entrance. Not because it was far, but because of the sheer amount of traffic. A constant stream of stones arriving, workmen moving around.
Like rush hour at the pyramid site.
Pretty much. He mentions every single stone had to be counted, every workman registered. It paints a picture of this immense, highly organized, centrally managed operation.
This papyrus sounds absolutely invaluable. Now, you mentioned earlier the number of stones, that revised estimate.
Right. So based on that 2010 discovery of the solid rock base, that 20-foot-high section, our team, scientists from different fields, we reevaluated the total number of individual blocks needed. And the conclusion was the Great Pyramid contains no more than 1 million blocks.
1 million, down from 2.3 million.
Yep. With an average weight anywhere from half a ton up to maybe 2.5 tons for most of them, it's a significant revision based on finding that solid foundation.
Okay, a major revision. What about inside the pyramid, the burial chamber, the purpose?
Well, traditionally, kings were buried under their pyramids. But Khufu and his father Snefer, actually, they're exceptions. There is a subterranean chamber cut beneath Khufu's pyramid, but it was never finished.
Never finished. Why not?
Our research suggests that around the 5th year of his reign, Khufu did something pretty radical. He declared himself the sun god, Ra, and after that declaration, it seems he changed the plan. He abandoned the underground burial and decided to build his chamber up within the body of the pyramid itself.
Declared himself the sun god. That's a huge shift.
It is, and there's more evidence. The actual name Khufu gave his pyramid was Akhet Khufu.
Akhet Khufu,
The horizon of Khufu. And the horizon, of course, that's where the sun rises and sets. It fits perfectly.
Right.
And it might also explain the Sphinx. The presence of the Sphinx and its temple at Giza is unique. One theory is that Khufu's son, Khafre, built the Sphinx perhaps as an offering to his father, Khufu, the sun god, in what would essentially be the first sun temple.
So the whole Giza complex becomes more than just tombs. It's tied into this sun god ideology.
That's the interpretation, yes. It elevates the whole meaning.
Interesting. You also mentioned something about a capstone ceremony.
Yes, at a site called Abu Sir, which is related, we found these fascinating depictions. They show workmen dragging a pyramid capstone. And above the capstone is the hieroglyphic word Jim.
Jim, what does that mean?
It translates as white and yellow gold. Electrum, essentially.
A gold capstone.
Seems like it.
Hmm.
And separately, we found scenes of dancing women. They're known as the Kinneret, the king's personal dance troupe. So my interpretation is that when the pyramid was finally finished and that gold-cased capstone was put right on the very top, it was a massive national celebration. It marked the moment the king became fully deified. The whole nation had worked on this project to make their ruler a god.
Wow. A nationwide effort, culminating in placing a golden capstone with celebratory dances. It really brings the scale and the belief system to life. Okay, but back to the practicalities. Moving those huge granite blocks for the king's chamber. From Aswan, you said, 500 miles away. That still sounds incredibly hard.
Oh, it absolutely was. It really shows their ingenuity and, again, the power of this national project. These blocks weighed anywhere from, say, 20 tons up to maybe 80 tons for the heaviest ones.
Took 80 tons.
Yes. And they transported them down the Nile. They used the annual flood season when the water was high, floating them on huge rafts.
Rafts carrying 80-ton blocks.
It's hard to fathom, but that seems to be how it was done. And again, we have direct evidence from inside the pyramid. Above the king's chamber, in those relieving chambers, they found inscriptions left by the work gangs.
You mentioned those names before.
Right. Gang names like Friend of Khufu or those who are connected with the Good Want, graffiti left by the workers, and there's even a date corresponding to the 13th year of Khufu's reign found up there, direct proof of the people involved.
Names of the work gangs written right inside the pyramid. That's incredible. Now, what about actually exploring inside the Great Pyramid? Those narrow shafts, the ones in the king's and queen's chambers, they've always been mysterious.
Yes, they have. We used a German-designed robot, Uput-2, to explore those shafts. One thing we found was how the internal stones of the pyramid were fitted together. They're interlocked, almost like fingers. Gives incredible stability.
Interlocked, oh yeah. And the shafts themselves.
The shafts leading from the king's chamber, the upper chamber, we discovered they actually originally went all the way to the outside of the pyramid. So the thinking is they likely served as a ventilation system.
Ventilation.
Yeah.
In a sealed tomb. That's clever. What about the shafts in the so-called queen's chamber below it?
Right. The queen's chamber, which is a misnomer, it wasn't for a queen. It has a second set of shafts, and these don't initially go outside. We sent the robot into the northern shaft first. It went about 60 feet and then encountered a sharp bend, so the robot couldn't go further at that time.
Okay, blocked by a bend. What about the southern shaft?
The southern shaft was different. It went straight for about 200 feet, and then it ended at a small stone door with 2 copper handles.
A door. Inside a tiny shaft, 200 feet in. What was behind it?
That was the big question. So in 2002, National Geographic funded another project. They designed a specialized robot, the Pyramid Rover. Bill Billard was involved. This robot was designed to carefully drill a tiny hole through that first door.
What did they see?
Just 21 centimeters behind the first door. There was a second door.
A second door.
Yes. And this one seemed to have some kind of ochre marking on it, maybe resembling Anubis, the guardian figure, like it was sealing something off.
Wow. Guard doors deep inside. And the northern shaft, the one with the bend.
Later exploration managed to get a camera around that bend, and guess what they found in the northern shaft, also at the same 200-foot distance?
Don't tell me. Another door.
Exactly. A third door, also with copper handles, matching the first one found in the southern shaft.
Multiple hidden doors, deep inside these narrow passages. What could they be sealing? And you mentioned even more recent discoveries, voids.
Yes, very recently, just in 2024, using muon tomography, part of the Scam Pyramids project, they made some really remarkable finds. Above the Grand Gallery, they detected a large void. We're talking roughly the size of 2 large trucks. Huge space.
A massive hidden space.
Wow. And also, behind that northern tunnel, the one with the third door, they found another smaller void. And inside the smaller void, they were able to detect hieroglyphic inscriptions.
Actual writing. Inside the pyramid structure itself, not just the chambers.
Correct. These are the only inscriptions found within the main body of the Great Pyramid, apart from those work gang names in the relieving chambers above the king's chamber. What makes it tricky and fascinating is that they appear to be hieratic script.
Hieratic? What's that?
It's like a cursive form of hieroglyphs. Quicker to write, but sometimes harder to read. So deciphering what they say is a challenge, but incredibly exciting.
Yeah.
Potentially very revealing information locked away.
Hieroglyphs. Hidden voids. The pyramid keeps revealing secrets. Now, of course, with structures this amazing and mysterious, you always get the alternative theories.
Oh, yes. Aliens, giants, lost civilizations, the usual suspects.
What's your take as someone who works there?
Look, simply put, there is absolutely zero scientific evidence to support any of those ideas. None. We have the tombs of the builders, we have their tools, we have the papyri like Merer's diary, we have the settlements, the quarries. The evidence for the ancient Egyptians building these is overwhelming. These alternative theories, they ignore all that evidence. It's frustrating sometimes. There was this one time a reporter seriously asked to see my secret bathroom tunnel that supposedly connected my house to the Great Pyramid.
A bathroom tunnel. You can't make this stuff up.
It just shows the kind of unfounded speculation that goes around.
Okay, no bathroom tunnels. What about those recent claims, I think, from Italian scholars using satellite radar, saying they found pillars under the pyramids?
Right, using satellite tomography. Look, it's an interesting technique, but there are serious questions. First off, these scholars, they've never actually worked on the ground in Egypt. Second, they published in a journal that wasn't peer-reviewed, which is a red flag in science.
Okay.
But more importantly, the technology itself. We talked to experts in radar and ultrasound, including the Scam Pyramids team who are working right there. And the consensus is it's highly unlikely that kind of satellite radar could penetrate nearly 600 feet of solid rock with enough accuracy to identify specific structures like pillars.
So the tech probably can't see that deep reliably.
That's the main concern. They also claim to see the Osiris shaft, which we know is only about 50 feet deep. If the tech struggles with known features, how reliable is it for supposed deep structures? There's a lot of skepticism from people actually working with ground-penetrating tech at Giza.
Right, skepticism based on the tech's limits.
Yeah.
Let's turn to the Sphinx then. It's got its own cloud of mystery.
It certainly does. You have the Edgar Cayce predictions, for instance, about a hidden chamber, a hall of records beneath its paws.
Did they ever check that?
They did. There was drilling conducted, seismic surveys. All they found was solid bedrock, no hidden chamber.
Okay, so no hall of records there. What about the idea that it's much older? The water erosion theory, Robert Schoch's idea.
Yes. Schoch proposed that the erosion patterns on the Sphinx and its enclosure suggest weathering by rainfall, meaning it would have to be thousands of years older from a wetter period. However, most geologists, including a scientist from Louisville University who studied it extensively, attribute the erosion primarily to wind and sand abrasion, which is consistent with the known Giza environment.
Wind erosion, not water.
Plus, the archaeological digs around the Sphinx clearly show Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and New Kingdom structures and layers built right on top of the bedrock. If the Sphinx was vastly older, you'd expect different layering.
That makes sense. What about the Sphinx's head looking kind of small for its body? People point to that a lot.
That's a common observation. Our theory, based on the geology of the Giza Plateau, relates back to those stone layers we talked about. The head seems to be carved from the better quality stone, that level 3 layer, which was higher up on the original outcrop. The much larger lion's body, however, would have extended down into the lower, poorer quality layers, level 1 and 2.
So they carved the head from good stone.
And then, to create the full lion body shape using the weaker stone below, they likely faced those lower levels with casing blocks and then sculpted the lion form onto that block facing. Over time, the original core stone and the facing blocks eroded differently, especially since the lower layers are weaker. This differential erosion could account for the apparent disproportion we see today.
Ah, so it's about how they constructed it using different quality rock layers.
Cover.
Any other Sphinx secrets?
Tunnels. We have found 4 tunnels within the Sphinx itself, but they seem to date much later, to around Dynasty 25, maybe the Sayite period. It looks like later attempts, perhaps, to search for hidden chambers themselves, or maybe repurpose the monument in some way, not part of the original design.
Okay. Now, you also mentioned some, let's say, more fringe ideas, things like Zepi.
Yes, this concept of Zep Tepi, a supposed mythical golden age, thousands of years before recorded Egyptian history, and claims of ancient king lists going back 30,000 years.
What's the deal with those?
Honestly, there's absolutely no archaeological or textual basis for them. The earliest actual Egyptian king lists we have, like the Palermo stone fragments, date to Dynasty 5. These ideas about vastly older civilizations or golden ages, they tend to fall into the category of, well, New Age speculation, not history based on evidence.
Right, dismissed due to lack of evidence. What about using carbon dating on the pyramids? Can't that settle the age question?
Well, carbon dating is a useful tool in many contexts, but I personally have less faith in it for dating Egyptian monumental stonework, especially the pyramids.
Why is that?
Firstly, Egypt has a remarkably strong absolute chronology already, based on king lists, inscriptions, astronomical records, and comparative dating of pottery and artifacts found in sequence. We often know dates very precisely from written records. Secondly, you can't carbon date the stone itself. You'd have to date organic material found within the mortar between the blocks.
Okay, so date the mortar.
The problem there is potential contamination or later repairs. If mortar was patched up centuries later, a carbon date might give you the date of the repair, not the original construction. Now, specifically for the Great Pyramid, it's worth noting there's actually no archaeological evidence of any significant restoration work being done on the core structure in antiquity. But the principle remains, absolute dating from inscriptions is generally preferred when available in Egypt.
So relying on the historical context in inscriptions is seen as more reliable for these structures. Makes sense. You've also been heavily involved in the conservation of these sites, haven't you?
Yes, absolutely. A huge part of my work over the decades has been focused on preservation. I directed the restoration of the Sphinx for many years, trying to correct damage done by earlier, less scientific attempts. And I also led the major conservation project on the Step Pyramid at Saqqara, which took about 14 years.
14 years on one pyramid.
It's incredibly detailed work. For me, ensuring these monuments survive for future generations, that's really the most important thing, sometimes more important than arguing about exactly when every single stone was laid.
A focus on preservation is crucial. Looking at the big picture then, how did this incredible pyramid building capability even develop? It didn't just appear overnight, right?
No, definitely not. We see a clear, gradual development. You start way back in prehistoric Egypt, the Stone Ages, then the Neolithic period brings agriculture. Then comes the pre-dynastic period, small states gradually unifying, culminating around 3000 BC with figures like Narmer or Menes uniting Upper and Lower Egypt. The early dynastic period follows, with the first pharaohs buried in large mud brick tombs, mostly at a site called Abydos.
Mud brick tombs first.
Right. But what's really striking is how quickly the technology advanced from there. You're talking maybe 500 years between those early mud brick structures and the incredible sophistication of the later stone pyramids.
Just 500 years. That's incredibly fast development.
It is. The big leap to stone construction really happens with King Djoser around Dynasty 3 and his famous architect Imhotep. They built the Step Pyramid at Saqqara, the first large-scale stone building. Then Djoser's successor, Sneferu Khufu's father, he experimented further. He built the Bent Pyramid, then the Red Pyramid at Dashur, refining the techniques. And all that learning, that rapid innovation, led directly to Sneferu's son, Khufu, being able to construct the Great Pyramid at Giza. It was an evolution, but a very rapid one.
A quick, intense period of architectural evolution. Are there still major discoveries being made from these earlier periods?
Oh, absolutely. Just recently, near the Step Pyramid at Saqqara, a tomb was found belonging to a king's son from that early era. Inside were remarkable statues of early dynasty kings. It's giving us new insights into that formative period, maybe even clues about Imhotep himself, whose tomb we still haven't definitively found.
Still searching for Imhotep's tomb.
And even from later periods, big finds are happening. A few years ago, a major ancient city was unearthed near Luxor. It dates to the reign of Amenhotep III, that's Tutankhamun's grandfather, Akhenaten's father, around 1390 BC. It's incredibly well preserved. Streets, houses, workshops making pottery and bricks, even a bakery, connections to the royal palaces. It's like a snapshot of life in Egypt's golden age, hailed as one of the most important finds in decades.
Wow, an entire city. So even after all this time, Egypt keeps offering up major secrets. Okay, one last clarification. You mentioned water found under the pyramid earlier. Was that just general groundwater or something
Got a
specific?
question. No, it wasn't a general water table under the whole structure. The water was found specifically inside the Osiris shaft.
The Osiris shaft. What's that?
It's a deep shaft located under the causeway leading to Khafre's pyramid, the second pyramid at Giza. Not directly under the Great Pyramid itself. When they pumped the water out of the shaft, they found multiple chambers. In the lowest one, there was a sarcophagus surrounded by water and 4 pillars carved with texts. The interpretation is that this was a symbolic burial place for Osiris, the god of the underworld. It connects the Giza Plateau to the ancient Egyptian concept of the underworld, which they called Restau.
A symbolic Osiris burial connecting Giza to the afterlife myths. Fascinating. So wrapping this all up, if you had to state the core principle for understanding ancient Egypt, especially these monuments, what would it be?
Without a doubt, it comes down to evidence. Relying on the scientific evidence, the archaeology, the inscriptions, the texts, the tangible findings. Theories are interesting, but unless they have a solid basis in that evidence, they remain just speculation. Whether it's ideas about lost technologies or, extraterrestrial help, they have to be viewed with extreme skepticism because the evidence just isn't there. The real story, the achievements of the ancient Egyptians themselves, using the tools and knowledge they had, as revealed by careful excavation and analysis, that's remarkable. But no, more remarkable, I think.
A powerful reminder, stick to the evidence. Okay, that brings us to the end of this deep dive. We've covered a lot: the real workforce, the source of the stones, the incredible insights from Meru's diary, those tantalizing voids and doors inside the pyramid, the truth about the Sphinx, and the importance of evidence. So here's a final thought to leave you with. Considering what the ancient Egyptians achieved, things that still baffle us today, seemingly without the technology we deem necessary, what other deeply ingrained assumptions about the past, about human capability, might crumble as future discoveries come to light? Something to ponder. Keep exploring the world of Egyptology, but always, as our experts stressed, with a critical eye on the evidence. Thanks for joining us.